I suggest that we start. So, okay. So, good morning, good afternoon. Hello, everybody, wherever you are. My name is Reinhard Huss. I'm the chairperson of this session. I'm a retired public health academic and I'm affiliated with BN, UBIE Lab Network, and also UBIE Europe. We are fortunate today because there are only 3 presenters, so we have a bit more time in our 1.5-hour session. And so I suggest that every presenter has 15 minutes for the presentation, then we have 5 minutes for questions related to the presentation, and then we go to the next one. And that would leave us at the end with another 30 minutes for general discussion. So first of all, I would like to invite Marek Hrubec from the Institute of Philosophy of the Czech Academy of Sciences to present the title is Basic Income Against Unequal Approach to Ownership. So please, Marek, go ahead. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you very much for an organization of this session and the organizers of the whole Congress for the event. And thank you for an introduction. Yes, I will talk about basic income against an unequal approach to ownership. Basic income lays the foundations for citizens also to take a more equal approach to ownership in order to reduce poverty, inequality, and increase living standards. This presentation will deal with 3 reasons why basic income can help concerning this equal approach and its application in reality. First, citizens with basic income will be less dependent on other people's ownership because they will have a tangible basis to pursue their own livelihood, which means that they will not have to accept disadvantageous employment contracts with business owners just to get by. Second, basic income gives citizens the basic resources and time they need to create startups, and therefore the ability to create private and public ownership. And third, basic income frees up citizens' time to engage in the economic life of society and enables them to play a hand in democratic decision-making on public, municipal, national, and other ownership that may be of benefit to them, especially public ownership of critical infrastructure in the form of health, network, transport, electricity, gas, water, postal services, etc. As we experience it during the pandemic and now the conflict in Europe, etc. In conclusion, the presentation will interconnect the 3 reasons in systemic explanation. So, first, breaking disadvantageous employment contracts and empowering economic independence. In the context of economic uncertainty and increasing wealth inequality, the concept of basic income can be useful as a potential solution to address poverty and inequality related to disadvantageous employment contracts and promote bigger economic independence and autonomy. Under the current economic system of dominant private ownership, many individuals find themselves trapped in low-paying or unfulfilling jobs due to financial obligations. Citizens are vulnerable to economic and social hardships and are compelled to accept unfavorable job conditions out of desperation. In traditional employer-employee relationships, the power dynamics can often be skewed, leading to disadvantageous employment contracts for workers. However, when individuals have a basic income as a foundation, they can negotiate employment terms from a position of greater strength, with the assurance that they can sustain themselves without, even without a particular job. Workers can demand fair wages, better working conditions, and more equitable treatment. This bargaining power helps to rebalance the relationships between employers and employees, fostering a more just and harmonious labor market. Second part of my presentation, fostering startups and cooperative ownership. The concept of basic income has garnered significant attention as a transformative solution, also by empowering individuals to pursue startups, new companies, new firms. It ensures that citizens have access to the fundamental resources and time needed to create startups, including public ownership. One of the most significant barriers to entrepreneurship is the lack of financial security. Starting a company, especially cooperative, with ownership of all included, often requires upfront capital and sustained investments during the initial stages. Basic income serves as a launchpad for aspiring citizens by providing them with a reliable and consistent modest source of income, which reduces the financial risk associated with starting a business. This safety platform allows people to take calculated risks, pursue their innovative ideas, and embark on the path to start a company. With basic income in place, individuals have the freedom and space and time to explore alternative models of ownership like cooperatives, which prioritize collective ownership, cooperation, and solidarity over traditional individualistic, competitive, profit-driven private structures. By reducing financial constraints, basic income encourages the formation of cooperatives, where individuals pool their skills, resources, and talents to create self-sustaining enterprises that benefit the community as a whole. It's possible to have private companies and also public companies like cooperatives, which are economic entities owned and operated by their members, who share the benefit and decision-making authority. Thus, it's more participatory and democratic. It's a kind of economic democracy. Third part of my presentation is focused on public ownership of critical infrastructure. Basic income offers citizens more time and enables them to participate in democratic decision-making on various kinds of public ownership. This applies both to infrastructure that has already been built and to new infrastructure that citizens can initiate and build together with the city council or the state government, for example. This citizens' engagement in the economic life of society is significant, especially in the public ownership of critical infrastructure in the form of a health network, transport, postal services, electricity, gas, water, and other infrastructure which is necessary for fulfilling basic needs of citizens. Certain critical infrastructures, such as electricity and water, possess natural monopolistic characteristics. Public ownership can help prevent monopolies or regulate them to protect citizen consumer interests. By setting fair pricing and service standards, governments can ensure that essential services remain affordable and accessible to all, even in the regions where private companies might not find sufficient profitability. And if it's controlled by democratic decision-making, by citizens' participation, it can be done in a better way. In modern societies, critical infrastructures are essential pillars supporting society's functioning. The ownership and management of these infrastructure play a vital role in shaping the socio-economic landscape. That's why I argue in favor of public ownership of critical infrastructure. And we saw as it was necessary during the pandemic and during natural disasters and other similar events. The public-owned healthcare, for instance, can better handle public health crises like the pandemic, providing coordinated and accessible care to all citizens. Similarly, public transport systems can be strategically expanded to address changing demographic needs and mitigate environmental challenges, while public-owned electricity and water networks can prioritize safety and sustainability over immediate profits. So it's also long-term thinking. Now I'd like to go to the conclusion. Systematically taken, the principle, if we look at that from the point of view of political philosophy and political science especially, the principle of social equality concerns the systemic institutional security of social and economic recognition, not only by means of redistribution, which is what basic income does primarily, but also by ensuring shared ownership in the form of cooperatives, municipal or state ownership, for instance, that paves the way for people to pursue democratic self-realization economically as well, and basic income helps here. So you see that now it's more from the point of view of economic philosophy and political economy. To conclude, basic income is a promising tool against an unequal approach to ownership and in favor of participatory economic democracy. It makes it possible to pursue away from disadvantageous employment contracts to better employment and to create and participate in cooperatives and public ownership of critical infrastructure. Thank you for your attention.
Yeah, thank you, Marek, for this very interesting presentation, and also for staying well in time. So that is great. And I would like, as we said, for any newcomers, we have sort of 5 minutes of comments and questions and answers related to this specific presentation. And then we go to the next one. And at the end, there will be 30 minutes of general discussion. So please, if anybody has questions,
and
raise
if you
your
want,
hands.
I have my paper, which is twice longer, maybe 3 times longer than what I presented, so I can send it to you. And Reinhard already has it, so he can share it with you if you like. And I'm open to your commentaries or questions if you like.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks a lot, Mark. Yes, okay, Otto, please go ahead and ask the question.
Yes, thank you so much. So my question is regarding the issue of the startup, the argument for basic income as a form of support for startups and cooperatives and so on. So my question is your argument that that basic income provides a particular level of general resources, and then people will have an incentive to use those resources to start startups? Or is the argument about incentives, or is it about kind of the formal freedom or formal sort of possibility of doing that? So are you sort of predicting that people will use their freedom this way, or are you saying that they will have the freedom to do so, but they may not exercise that freedom?
Thank you for your question. Well, I have 2 replies. One is empirical and one theoretical. And in fact, I started to think about that on the basis of the empirical finding, because when some people were unemployed, they had no resources and they were expected to accept some jobs. But what they started to do when they got some money during the unemployment period, they started to make their own startups. They thought, okay, I have some little money and I have time now, I'm unemployed, or I have a kind of job which is not interesting for me without any self-realization. And they started to do spontaneously. So we see that when people have some little money, either in basic income experiments or in the period of unemployment, and they are paid by the municipal council, for example, they are active in this way. They start creating startups. Second, which is also connected with empirical findings, is that some unemployed people wanted to do something to find a job, and the city council offered some voluntarily activities which were partly paid, or some people were unemployed, or they had money, but they wanted to do something for the self-realization, and they made an agreement with the city hall, and they started to do something for the city, parks, or taking care about elderly, or creating kindergartens, small circles, just a group of 5 mothers or fathers, etc. And they were active in this way. And then it started as a startup, in fact, it started as a voluntary activity in an agreement with the city hall, and then the people started to make startups, and companies were created. So we saw that it's the reality under various conditions. And second, when I think about that from a theoretical point of view, I think that yes, we can think that let's say mainly basic income is about a redistribution of money, but we can think about distribution also, not only redistribution but distribution, and it's connected with ownership. Ownership creates something which can be redistributed, while basic income is dependent on some other resources. But in this way, we see that basic income can create resources for paying something. And if you create a startup, it's good for the people who are involved in the company, especially if it is a cooperative, or if it is focused on critical infrastructure. It impacts much more people, and it serves the whole community. And moreover, it can create money for paying basic income. So this is my theoretical reflection, that basic income is mainly about redistribution, but we can think also about distribution of, let's say, resources of money, resources for basic income, resources of, in the sense of ownership.
Yeah, thank you, Marek, for your clear and detailed response. If there's any other question, it has to be short because we have only 1 minute before the next one. If anybody has got a question for Marek, please raise your hand. Or otherwise, if not, then I think we go to the next presentation. Doesn't seem to be another question, so let's go to the next presentation of Jasmina Jerant from the University of Ljubljana in Slovenia, and she will speak to us about basic income and social well-being of young adults. Please, Jasmina, go. It's all over to you. The floor is to you. Thank you.
Thank you. I will try to share. Is it visible? Can you see it?
Yes, it becomes, there is a text visible. Oh, hang on. Yeah, it's visible. Yeah, I can see this.
It is?
Yeah. Oh, no, I can't. Yes, now I can see the references. If you go back, yeah. That's impact. Yeah, now it's the first slide, impact of autonomous cash benefits on the social well-being of young adults. I assume everybody can see it. Yes, thanks a lot. Please go ahead.
Okay, I hope it, okay, thank you. Hello to everyone. It's very nice to be here, and thank you for welcoming me or inviting me. I'm a PhD student at the Faculty of Social Work at University of Ljubljana. And today I'm presenting my research or study on the impact of autonomous cash benefits on the social well-being of teenagers, in fact, young adults, teenagers. When I say teenagers, I mean young adults from 15 to 18 years old. And when I talk about autonomous cash benefits, I talk from a unique new perspective on cash benefits that present kind of a shift in focus. Instead of unconditionality and universality that has usually been studied in cash transfers or cash benefits, there's also a point of autonomy. So let's see how this works. So first, if we go to social well-being, social well-being stems from the satisfaction with relationships, social roles, and with the environment. Poverty, however, on the other hand, which is not just a result of income inequality, but it also exacerbates by shame, stigma, low self-worth, and lack of autonomy. So poverty makes actually lowers the social well-being, reduces one well-being. And as it happens that actually low social well-being has a particularly negative effect on teenagers, so between 15 to 18 years old. This is due to their specific development during adolescence, in which time they worry a lot and try to and they get shamed and stigmatized by comparison to their peers, and that really negatively impacts their self-esteem. And this lower social well-being actually can deepen and perpetuate their unequal social and economic standing, and can even deepen the risk of poverty and social exclusion also through their life course. So this is not a momentary effect on young adults or teenagers in their particular age, but can also impact their future. So if we look now at autonomous cash benefits, I conducted a study in 2016 in Slovenia on disadvantaged Slovenian teenagers between 15 to 17 who lived in poverty. And these studied teenagers received monthly cash benefit from charity program. And the study was based on in-depth interviews, and it showed that the cash benefits in question actually lessened their poverty-related social exclusion. As you can see here on the presentation, I mentioned a coffee a day, and it was very interesting what I found in this study, that even a coffee a day, which was at the time in 2016, for example, €1 in Ljubljana, meant a huge difference for them. So these teenagers received, I will say, only €30, which is really not that much, but it showed that even that little money that they received a month meant a lot. In the meaning, they were repeating, oh, I can at least now go for coffee with my friends. So on one hand, very often, like different studies or even public opinion is that like young adults, particularly those in poverty, should not be spending money, that it's not beneficial to them in the meaning of bills and receipts or so on, or food or for school stuff. So we often very like to be patronizing or paternalistic, actually, to the extent of people who are disadvantaged of how they should live their life. But in reality, this is not the case, and particularly that's why we're talking about the basic income, because we want to overcome that note, which is in public opinion in general. So a coffee a day meant a huge difference for them. And why? Because in Slovenia, we have this kind of a cultural necessity to go for coffee, to maintain good relationship with friends and people you love and you are close to. So these teenagers in Slovenia as well, during their school breaks in high schools or after the programs, they go for coffee with their friends, their peers. However, of course, teenagers who were disadvantaged and in poverty couldn't afford it. So this way they were socially excluded. They had a lower self-esteem. They felt bad about themselves, and they didn't feel like they could ever get out of the situation. And we're talking here only about the coffee, how can impact one person, not all of the rest of the, we can imagine the circumstances one has. So, however, when they got this cash benefit through charity program, they could finally, in the first time, for coffee with friends, and it really made a huge difference with them. Also, why? Because this actually presented for them autonomy. And what does this mean? So they received this money directly, not through parents. So this is how autonomy manifested. So they received it directly from the charity program, not through parents that could control their use. And in both ways, neither parents nor the state controlled their use, how they used it. So these kids were constantly repeating, I felt autonomous, that I can do with this money what I could, and they felt empowered. And this had actually a positive impact on their social relations and personal well-being. Also, besides that, this study showed the same results, kind of similar results at the study in Britain that was conducted in 2002 by Tess Rich. And the study actually studied in UK children and youth that lived in poverty, and they as well expressed the need and wish for their own pocket money, that they wouldn't need to ask their parents. As it showed in my study as well, it was very difficult for these teenagers to beg, as they said, their parents for a little bit of money for coffee. They found it torturous, excruciating, extremely painful and shameful, because their parents were already struggling with money. So for them, it was very shameful. And as it showed through these answers and through analysis, I realized this was very similar as to adults when they feel ashamed and stigmatized when they have to beg the state in some way for the financial aids, for cash benefits, cash transfers, if we know how means-tested benefits work. So it was a very, very similar situation between teenagers asking parents for money and adults asking the state. So that's why kind of naturally the question for me arose, which kind of cash policy would actually most resemble these autonomous cash benefits, as I named them, consequently because of this autonomy that showed through the case. So which kind of cash policy would most resemble? And UBIE, basic income, seemed kind of the closest and best answer to it, seemed the obvious answer, because its universal and conditional nature does not stigmatize on one hand, and the recipients, they're allowed to use the money in any way they prefer. However, then the exploring of the basic income literature revealed that underage youth was not considered eligible recipient, and at the same time, there was no consensus yet how old they should be. So we know that basic income literature is usually talking, should it be at 0 age? Should it be 18? Should it be whatever age? Or child cash benefits usually talk about 6 years of age, but no one is talking about teenagers. And at the same time, usually it is kind of predicted that the money would go directly to parents, so not to teenagers, even though they are capable of agency and taking care of themselves in many other aspects. We, for example, allow them to have sex before they are 18, drive a car before they are 18, and so on. Many things. They work during vacation and so on. So very huge responsibilities that they take. So in extensive contemporary interdisciplinary discussions on basic income overlook teenagers completely, and basic income advocates mostly suggest directing, as I said, basic income to parents. So even basic income experiments and analysis, except for example, Evelyn Forget in 2011, ignore or kind of overlook the teenagers in the studies in analysis. Forget, for example, she at least looked for impact on schooling, and even the ongoing Welsh experiment, in fact, where it's meant for young caregivers, stops at 18, or actually, let's say it starts at 18. So underage youth, it's not in consideration. Likewise, in Korean experiment, much over 18. So even then the worldwide study of cash benefits, a huge umbrella study from Stanford Basic Income Lab, showed that UBIE type programs differ across groups, and that there should be more analyzed, more deep analysis on subgroup on age. So this left me with logic study of going to autonomous cash benefits and social well-being of teenagers in order to develop knowledge further. So the main objective is to examine how do these kind of benefits impact the social well-being of teenagers, and particularly how do they impact the maintenance of valuable social relationships that are highly important to teenagers and their well-being. So to develop knowledge further, the project's novelty actually lies in the shift in the focus, as I mentioned, on the autonomy, as expressed in the no control from parents and nor the state. So over the distribution of the money and the use, as opposed to the usual focus on the unconditionality and the universality of cash transfers. Then also it's interesting how teenagers use money and how they feel about it. This would provide more insight into the autonomy part from a relational perspective. The first step of this project is to study different features of cash benefits to see what could count as an autonomous cash benefit and to explore why this autonomous feature of own money and uncontrolled use is vital for teenagers and what we can learn from it. And another objective is to analyze how does this kind of benefit affect one of the most important aspects, so relationships as a key variable which define the quality of teenagers' social well-being. So it's actually to explore the maintenance of relationship as the key variable with, of course, peers, parents, school, community, and so on. And in light of the findings and that come from these interviews and opinions, which are actually important, because very often we forget that when we're talking about social policies, we have to include people who actually social policies are aimed to or targeted at, not just kind of define them on our own. So a policy proposal of a basic income for youth based on the opinions of the youth that would use this basic income. With this way, actually filling the debate, fill the gap in the current basic income debate on the experiments that overlook the underage youth. So just quickly, the three main research questions that are planned for the study. So how does the autonomous side of cash policies relate to the social well-being of teenagers? So here, the second one, how do 15 to 18-year-olds use different types of cash benefits in relationship maintenance? And how could a policy proposal present an approximation of autonomous cash benefit for teenagers? So for the first research question, so how do they relate to social well-being? There's a plan of actually undergoing the systematic qualitative review. So the study answers to develop the theory of social and relational well-being of teenagers through a systematic review of existing studies and experimental data on autonomous cash benefit, of course, with the concept of social well-being through relationships. And then this part is the case study for the second research question, which goes how do actually 15 to 18-year-olds use different types of cash benefits. And this time I will use a case in Slovenia that would work as an empirical proxy, because we have in Slovenia high school students get stipends from different stipends that can amount from 100 to 300 euros. And this is in the country where the average net salary is around 1,300 euros. So if a teenager receives 100 to 300 euros, this can go almost up to 1/4 of the average salary in Slovenia, which is quite a lot for teenagers. And so looking into how does it actually, this population of high school students that receive, for example, stipends, the stipends for the talented, then the stipend that comes for vocational schooling, then we have the state stipend, a few other ones, because this would give me a different background. So not only children that live in poverty, but actually a much bigger pool of population that has different living conditions, and it would more get closer to the actual looking into how would basic income experiment work on different populations, no matter the background. Financial or socioeconomic background. And then the third one is policy proposal. As I mentioned, that would actually answer the third research question and combine teenagers' opinions. To see the policy proposal would build from the combination of these findings of the systematic review, so from the first part, and opinions of the studied teenagers to actually provide an empirical proxy towards the design of a new basic income policy. So this experience and wishes actually to present the scholarly debate, and this would be the main fundament in structuring the design and implementation that features of the basic income for underage youth. So basically, this is how it is planned. And that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jasmina, also for staying well in time, and also for this very interesting research proposal which you developed. And I would like to open the floor. Is there any question or comment from people participating in our session? Anybody who wants to ask questions? Or everybody is, yeah, or there, Marek. Yeah, please go ahead, Marek.
Thank you for your presentation, Jasmina. It was illuminating for me. I have a question concerning comparison of those kind of cash transfers to the youth with potential basic services. You said that, for example, they can buy coffee a day. Do you think, or do you have any data, how the young people in the experiment or other experiments would react to a possibility to get free coffee in a workshop, for example? Sometimes it's analyzed that you can attract young people to some activities, sport activities, or intellectual or other activities, environmental activities. And then you can say, okay, you can get free coffee or beer if they are over 18, etc., etc. So you can get 2 in 1, you know, to offer them coffee or beer or whatever what they want, and attract them at the same time to some valuable activities. But maybe they would say, oh, it's only free of charge, and I don't value that so much. So they rather buy it themselves in coffee house. But I just want to compare these, let's say, basic income on the one side and basic services on the other side.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. It's a good question, and it actually quite often arises in different shades, though. But it's very often, it's like, what if we would provide some kind of vouchers? What if we would provide some kind of services? What if we would provide just some kind of gatherings for young adults? Why giving them money? How would that work? In fact, I don't really now by head know any examples of that they would be giving this kind of vouchers and how it works. But in general, why I'm proposing and thinking about the free money for teenagers is from the same reason that I'm thinking about and proposing basic income as a free money for adults. And without the paternalism of saying how they should use it. And on one hand, as a political philosopher, as like looking from the perspective of roles, if there is a possibility of finding a policy that actually, or a political tool that works for the worst of, I think in the case of teenagers who live in poverty, if we can imagine that they could be the worst of, then there might be a financial policy that would work in their benefit. From this reason, from political theoretical perspective, as I see it, I'm trying to avoid then the research on the services, but exactly for the money, because this is what I'm interested, because that's very rarely actually studied, and it usually there is a very quick judgment and conclusion that teenagers shouldn't be using money on their own because they will spend it on cigarettes, on alcohol, on drugs. But as it showed in Canada, income, which lasted for a few years, teenagers actually returned to school because they had better financial condition instead of working, and there was less drinking and less drugs. Because the fact is, as we live in capitalism, and if we all use money, and it kind of gives us a possibility for an easier life, also for those who live in poverty, money empowers. So that's why. Looking from this perspective, how to find solutions for the worst off.
Okay, thank you,
I
Jasmina.
find the services a little bit paternalistic in this meaning. Maybe that's why I'm more fond of this.
Thank you. I agree with you.
Thank you. Unless there is any burning question, I think we should now give Otto Lehto a chance. Otto is going to, from New York University, going to talk to us about ordoliberalism and basic income lessons from history and future prospects. So the floor is yours, Otto. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Let's see if I can get this to show. All right, it's looking good. You can see this, right? So it's all good.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, good. Oh yes, so thank you. So my presentation is at the intersection of a few of my papers. So I've written on the around ordoliberalism, but I've never really written specifically on it. So now I'm preparing a paper on the topic. Now this is still kind of in rough shape, in the sense that it's still it's still in quite early stages. I've written about different versions of liberalism and basic income. That's kind of one of my main research agendas, and it's also the topic of my PhD and my book that's hopefully coming out of that. I'm preparing a manuscript of that at the moment, looking at the relationship between different liberal versions of basic income and innovation and creativity in the economy. But what I'm doing here is I'm going to look at what the German tradition of ordoliberalism has to say about basic income, if anything. Instead of giving a history lesson, I'm sort of more reflecting on it from the point of view of two different angles. I'm going to show you. So I'm going to first start by summarizing what I think is the ordoliberal problem of social security, and then I'm going to briefly go through Foucault's reading of ordoliberalism and basic income as a way of really grounding what I think is a pretty good reading of ordoliberalism as a way of reading into basic income as well. And then I'll provide one plausible model of thinking about what an ordoliberal UBI model might look like, because it doesn't exist. I will take James Buchanan's model of constitutional basic income, or demogrant, which I've written a paper on, as one plausible model that is compatible with the ordoliberal approach to governance, and that would be, I think, compatible with it. So I'm not taking a normative stance here. So I'm not going to say that we should be sympathetic to ordoliberalism, or that we should embrace its models, but I'm saying if we take the principles of ordoliberalism seriously, these are the sort of readings of basic income, and these are the sort of models that would be compatible with it. Okay, so the principles of ordoliberalism can be summarized as support for the competitive order, support for something like the economic constitution or rule of law, the rules of the game, and three, Ordnungspolitik in German, which is the politics that focuses on the rules of the game, of the order of the basic rules of the market society, and tries to implement policies that either support those rules or are incompatible with them. And it acts as a kind of filter against policies, including social policies and models of social security that go against the principles of competitive order. So also, if we have a basic income model of ordoliberalism, it has to pass three tests. It has to support the competitive order. It has to somehow fit into the idea of the economic constitution, and it has to be compatible with Ordnungspolitik. The problem is that in the history of ordoliberalism, which really starts 100 years ago in Germany, especially in Freiburg, in the so-called Freiburg School, there is no unified model. And as we know, the idea of ordoliberalism really changes because it becomes sort of mainstream in the new well, not the first West Germany and then the unified Germany. It sort of becomes part of the political discourse, part of the sort of one of the pillars of the German social market economy. So it becomes this kind of vague, almost catchword that doesn't always clearly have a clear shape. But if you go to the early form of Freiburg School, you do have, it's still a minority position, and it's very clearly focused on the intersection of law and economics, and it's looking at constitutions, it's looking at rule of law, and it's looking at the sort of basic rules that should govern competitive society. For example, Daniel Nientid has summarized the idea that if there's going to be a successful social policy in ordoliberal policy, it should be characterized by not hampering market processes, but being implemented in line with them. It's sort of market conformity or marktkonformität in the idea of Alfred Müller-Armack, who's one of the leading architects of the post-war German ordoliberal revival, if you will. So it's true that most ordoliberals support some kind of social security, but their opinions on this vary a lot. There isn't a consensus, and there is a lot of different opinions. And now some ordoliberals, like Müller-Armack, often supported even extensive welfare measures. Some are much more critical, and they only support very meager ones. And almost nobody supports completely unconditional and universal benefits like UBI. So it's very hard to say what an ordoliberal basic income would be, because very few of them are engaged in the same sort of debates that, for example, liberals in the United States and UK are, because, well, in the US, as we know, the Chicago School, which is one of the leading schools of market liberalism, was actively providing new models and new discourses about basic income in the discussion about negative income tax. But these ideas of negative income tax and so on, they are only on the margins of the debate in the ordoliberal discourse. And the issue of social security there is much more in line with the sort of Bismarckian tradition, thinking about kind of the social democratic models and trying to critique them and see whether they are compatible with ordoliberal principles. But there is less idea of trying to create, you know, a very sort of clear basic income or social security model of basic income. For example, we can take Wilhelm Röpke, who's again one of the leading post-war supporters of this model, who's also kind of very different from many of the other ones. They're all kind of different from each other. But Röpke says that, for example, that the desire for security, while itself natural and legitimate, can become an obsession, which ultimately must be paid for by the loss of freedom and human dignity. For there can be no security without freedom and protection from arbitrary power. So there's a warning against the expansion of social security. And he even says that the road we must take is plainly mapped, not more welfare state, but less. So this is kind of the sort of conservative end of the ordoliberal spectrum, where you have this clear statement that we should have more mutual aid, charities, and less compulsory social security. At the same time, in the same book, Röpke says that we cannot nowadays do without a certain minimum of compulsory state institutions for social security, including public old age pensions, health insurance, accident insurance, widows' benefits, unemployment relief. Now that's a big list, right? There must naturally be room for all of these in the concept of sound social security system in a free society, however little enthusiasm we may feel for them. It is not their principle which is in question, but their extent, organization, and spirit. So principally, they are, you know, okay with it, but they worry about the extent, the organization, and spirit of these, and they want to curtail certain aspects of it. So there's a critique, there's a desire to limit and be cautious. This is the conservative element of it, but there's also this idea that there's a legitimate role for social security in the world. So this is kind of where we are. So I think what is next for ordoliberalism, people really need to think about how basic income discourse could be made compatible, if we want to make it compatible with ordoliberalism, and especially useful for people who work in countries shaped by ordoliberalism, like Germany and and even many of the European Union countries, because European Union rules have some elements, some traces of ordoliberal thinking. It seems that ordoliberalism would be compatible theoretically with at least some kind of a constitutionalized UBI model that is part of the economic constitution of ordoliberalism, that uses this constitutional scaffolding to fix and shape the rules of market competition. But there are different ways this could go. One would be to sharpen the critique of social security. This leads to more conservatism, austerity, and so on. Another approach is taken by my colleague Bernhard Neumerker in Freiburg, who's the head of the Freebis Institute there, who's developing this model of new ordoliberalism, which is combining some of the old ordoliberal thinking with a support for basic income and support for some other new advances in, for example, behavioral economics and other aspects of public policy. But my own approach is kind of a third option, which is that I'm trying to draw lessons from the Chicago and Virginia schools of liberalism and try to make ordoliberalism compatible with them. Now I'm going to only very briefly mention Foucault. Foucault wrote in the Collège de France lectures of 78-79, the so-called biopolitics lectures about neoliberal governmentality, looking at it from the point of view of how it shapes power, knowledge, subjectivity. And he was looking at Chicago, Otto, and Austrian schools of neoliberalism. And he especially was interested in negative income tax. So I'm currently writing a paper on Foucault as a basic income scholar. So hopefully that will come out later this year. But Foucault's role in this debate is not really widely understood or discussed. He was a pioneer of UBI, but most people lack the fact that he was discussing basic income in the neoliberal context. They often discuss him as a general theorist of power, but they separate this from the fact that he was actually working in this neoliberalism issue in this context. And for example, some of the prominent thinkers like Van Parijs and Van der Burg, who I respect greatly, I think they clearly misread Foucault as a critic of neoliberalism. I think that it's clear that Foucault is interested in neoliberalism not just as a danger, but also as a way of new type of governmentality that can also open up some possibilities. So remember that this is writing before Thatcher and Reagan. So he's writing in the late 70s. He's quite early on interested in the new ideas of neoliberalism coming into power. He explores the utopian promise of this, but he's also looking at the pitfalls and dangers of it. The most interesting thing is that he sees in it kind of the end of the disciplinary state. So his idea is that he's reading these Chicago people, he's reading Austrian liberals, and he's saying, okay, what they want is a society that has a limited government that does not interfere into people's private affairs, only shapes the rules of the game, and therefore supports more individual freedom, diversity, and experimentation. Foucault was very interested in all these things because he was very much interested in freedom, diversity, and experimentation. That was kind of his whole normative focus. But he also saw how this could create new risks and dangers, especially by maintaining kind of a problematic liminal population, meaning at the limit of employment and unemployment, people who are just constantly shifting between employment and unemployment with very low level of state support. Although this support would be guaranteed, as it was in the Chicago school model of negative income tax, there would still be people who are kind of like at the reserve level of being like treated as nothing but kind of a reserve of labor that sometimes goes to unemployment, sometimes comes back to employment, and this is kind of how they are seen, stripped of any other. But Foucault mostly likes the fact that the state does not try to treat people as like as try to get inside their heads or try to shape their behavior behind this, more than this kind of very basic level of, okay, give you incentives to work, but also give you security if you fall below this level. So he writes that with UBI or negative income tax, the famous distinction that Western governmentality has tried to so long to establish between the good and the bad poor, between voluntary and involuntary unemployed, is not important. After all, it does not and should not concern us to know why someone falls below the level of the social game. Whether he's a drug addict or voluntarily unemployed is not important. Whatever the reasons, the only problem is whether he's above or below the threshold. So this is the idea of negative income tax. If you fall below a certain level, you get automatic support no matter what your position is. And this is why he found this kind of neoliberal idea of negative income tax very interesting. So the ordoliberal or neoliberal UBI, because Foucault was looking at UBI from the point of view of kind of the French context where ordoliberalism was coming from Germany, but he's also reading the American Chicago scholars. So he's trying to combine these and sort of see them all as part of this general neoliberal trend. So he sees that in this kind of thinking, the UBI or negative income tax provides general security, but at the lowest level, on the level of the economic mechanisms of the game, of competition and enterprise, that these will be allowed to function. But above this threshold, everyone will have to be an enterprise for himself or for his family. So there's this idea of the entrepreneurial self that comes into being. So I will close by very briefly mentioning one possible mechanism for creating an ordoliberal model of basic income. This is the idea of Buchanan's, who is a Virginia school neoliberal, if you will, or neoclassical liberal, who's written of the idea of a constitutional basic income. So I wrote this paper. You can read it, open access, in Constitutional Political Economy. It's called Welfare Without Rent Seeking, which is about Buchanan's Democrat proposal and the possibility of a constitutional welfare state. So I will skip these parts, but the basic idea is that in this idea of constitutional basic income, or the whole constitutional approach to governance, which is very sympathetic to the early ordoliberal school. So I think there's a lot of overlap. And indeed, Buchanan visited Freiburg, and there was a lot of discourse, especially between some of the later Ordo scholars and Buchanan. The idea is that politics may be made better in the evaluation of all participants if political action can be constrained constitutionally. So the idea is to constrain agents and agencies of governance not to act non-discriminatorily, to treat all persons and groups of persons alike, and to refrain from behavior that is selective. So the welfare state should not discriminate between you and your neighbor, between group A and group B. It should treat all people alike, and not to engage behaviors or policies that treat people differently. So this is again why Buchanan was so interested in basic income. So Buchanan saw the basic income because it has two characteristics. It has the idea of generality and non-discrimination. And he wanted this to be part of the taxation system and the redistribution system. So that's why he supported basic income and a flat tax. Basic income is a general and non-discriminatory benefit, and flat tax is a general and non-discriminatory tax. So that's why he wanted to combine those two. And he wanted those rules, secondly, to be constitutionalized outside of day-to-day politics. And he claimed that if redistribution can be elevated to the constitutional realm and removed from the agenda of daily politics, the welfare state can promote general welfare rather than special interest politics, because he was really worried about special interests taking over. And he wanted to have this rule of law constitutional approach, which is very much an ordoliberal idea, even though he comes from a different school of neoliberalism. So that's why I think Buchanan's model is the one that's closest to the ideas of ordoliberalism. All right, so let's see, I'm just going to close here. So the basic idea is that the Democrat, what he called the Democrat or constitutional basic income, would embody some constitutional constraints on the welfare state, would have the virtues of generality and non-discrimination, and it would secure equal rights to all. But at what cost? The question is this enough? Because he wanted to get rid of basically the whole welfare state, so this could be very problematic. But he wanted everybody to have this access to general benefits, but not to have special benefits and not to have special discriminatory taxes or benefits. This would be one way of doing. So my conclusion, therefore, is that ordoliberalism does provide a kind of coherent doctrine of governance, as analyzed by Foucault and as analyzed by the liberals themselves, but it lacks a unified model of social security. So I think some UBI and negative income tax models are compatible with ordoliberalism, but they are not necessarily necessitated by them. Ordoliberalism is also compatible with kind of some austerity and very sort of conditional benefit models. So basic income is only one model it can go. But if we really take the sort of constitutional early Ordo school, Freiburg school idea seriously, then I think something like Buchanan's constitutional Democrat would be very much compatible with it, and indeed I think might be a better option than any of the sort of austerity kind of based approaches where you have conditional benefits with targeting and discrimination, because only sort of a constitutional basic income is compatible with the idea of really fixing the rules of the game on the high level. So that's why I think we should look in that direction, or perhaps in the model of negative income tax as the way to try and build, if we want to build, ordoliberal basic income. Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Otto, for this very interesting presentation, I learned more about ordoliberalism, but also about Foucault. So that was also very interesting. Thank you. So before we open the general discussion, I just want to ask you, do you have any specific question for Otto? But please be short, and if you have any specific question for Otto, otherwise we open up to a more general discussion. Is there anybody who has a sort of specific, just raise your hands. If not,
I see Marek has his hand up.
Oh, has he? Okay, I didn't. Yeah, Marek, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. I have a question concerning if it is adequate to interpret Foucault in that way, in a connection with ordoliberalism and neoliberalism as well, after what happened when Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan introduced neoliberalism. Of course, theoretically, yes, we can compare Foucault's theory with other ordoliberal theories, but maybe it's important to differentiate between ordoliberalism, which is many times connected with welfare state, and order neoliberalism, which is not connected usually with welfare state. And after neoliberalism, or right-wing neoliberalism, which happened since the 80s, and order neoliberalism after the global financial crisis in 2008, maybe it's more appropriate to interpret Foucault's analysis of that topic as kind of, or in a connection with left-wing libertarianism. I think that it's close to that. What do you think about that? Second, just a short commentary. You mentioned that flat tax is non-discriminatory. Well, many people, especially those who are in favor of welfare state, would not agree, because usually it's considered very discriminatory. People who have just $100 per month and pay 10% tax, 10% means much more for them than for the people who have $1 billion per month, for example, and pay 10%. So flat tax is considered very, very discriminatory, I would say. Okay, thank you for.
Yes, please,
Okay.
Otto, go ahead with your response.
Okay, so I'll take the first one. Thanks so much for that. So I'll take the second one first regarding flat tax. So I was representing Buchanan's model, where he does rely on the flat tax. And I think his argument why the flat tax is non-discriminatory are quite powerful. I personally think that also progressive tax could be compatible with this kind of approach, if you have kind of a very simple and clear. So the question is always, do you have a simple and clear system? It doesn't matter whether it's progressive or flat. If you have a very simple and clear progressive tax, that also works, I think, equally well. But the problem is you don't want too many loopholes. You don't want too many exceptions, because that deviates from the idea of rules of the game and basic rules for everybody. So you want to have a simple and clear system for everybody. And regarding the first issue, yeah, I mean, so Foucault died in '84, so he never really got to see the full sort of ways in which neoliberalism was developed. I disagree a little bit about neoliberalism not having an interesting welfare state. If you go back to the early discussions of the Mont Pelerin Society, for example, including the first meeting in the 40s, you see that discussions of welfare state and redistribution were quite powerfully there all the time. And they also discussed negative income tax, and they discussed all these other things there. So there was kind of a general consensus among a lot of these people, including Friedman and others, that you need some kind of social security. It's just a matter of what kind and how it should be implemented. Yeah, I think the ordoliberals have a stronger connection to the welfare state for many reasons, especially in the social market economy sense. But also one of the problems of looking at like Thatcher and Reagan and so on is a lot of them only implemented some parts of the say the Chicago School ideas, but not others. And for example, they did not implement negative income tax, so which was part of the one of the core ideas of Friedman and Becker and others. So so yeah, it's important to distinguish between different schools and also between the different models. And the last thing I will say, yeah, I think you mentioned left libertarianism and also anarchism and these kind of things. I think these are very much part of also Foucault's interests. So Foucault is approaching neoliberalism as someone who's generally a person of the left. I mean, however you define that, although there's some debate about whether that's an appropriate label. But he was clearly interested. He was opposed to a lot of the, you know, lot of the models of not only the communists of his time, but also of the social democrats, because he saw that social democrats were pushing for a welfare state that was again disciplinary and pastoral and all these things that he didn't like. So he was interested in neoliberalism as providing one way of thinking outside of that framework. But yes, he was approaching it from a point of view of what could be considered left libertarian or this kind of outside reading of neoliberalism. He never became a neoliberal, I don't think, but he was interested in and partially sympathetic to some of its aspects.
Okay, thank you, Otto. Are there other questions, general comments, or questions for specific speakers? If not, I take my privilege and ask sort of two questions for Jasmina I've got. I mean, one question I would like to ask, maybe it's still too early to answer, what would be your age limit to set for adolescents to receive a basic income or a cash transfer and decide independently? I got a bit the impression it may be 15 years, but I would like to see. And then with your high school stipend research, how much does this include teenagers in poverty? Because often from my sort of knowledge, the high schools often are filled by more privileged teenagers rather than teenagers in poverty. So will this cover this group? So thank you. That's my two questions.
Thank you for the questions. Yes, in regards to age limit, I went from 15 to 18 and you memorized well. Because of particular reason, or because this study that I did in 2016 was actually in the frame of my master's that I did at Central European University in political science. And I found that often when the literature, when talking about children or young adults being at the risk of poverty and social exclusion, talks about young adults from 18 on. So we have, on one hand, we have like that young adults from 18 to 24 at the most risk of poverty and social exclusion. But then we have also this NEET group, neither in employment nor in education, that is a very risk high poverty and social exclusion, who are between 15 to 34. So then crossing both groups, we get to this 15 to 18. So in the group under 18 is the second largest group of at the risk of poverty and social exclusion when it comes to age. And so between 15 to 18, we get to this kind of, when it's crossed, we get to this group of 15 to 18, which are at huge risk of poverty and social exclusion. That's one reason, because of this literature just crossing. The other reason is because of their particular development. They're much more prone to get very much affected by what's happening to them in that age when they are 18 or when they are under 15. And the third reason was because the studies of cash benefits and cash transfers very often, when they study the family income and the family situation, they give the questionnaires to parents who answer for their children how they feel, or they give to teenagers or young adults questionnaires from 15 on, but they get questionnaires for adults. So they're never considered separately as a particular group, always completely, like in a lot of literature is only considering the smaller children, as if this group in between didn't exist at all, but they are so vulnerable, and there is so many things that can happen, how they feel, and actually can impact their future. That's why 15 to 18. At the same time, when we come to high school, it's the stipends. Yes, they are included because there is this state stipend that is given to disadvantaged, those who, like, it comes to the level, the income level. So none of these stipends, it's not per se a perfect example of basic income, as it's no other cash benefit that has ever been actually really studied so far. They just possess basic income kind of characteristics. So there's always something that it's not completely unconditional and not completely universal, but still they are very basic income kind of programs. Also, the study that was done at Stanford Basic Income Lab studied cash benefits that just resemble basic income, but they don't, of course, we haven't implemented it yet. So yes, there is this state stipends for children who live in poverty, and then also vocational schooling. Of course, as usually, because this is also means tested in regards to asking, you know, how much people, where is this threshold, how much parents receive. It's very ridiculous that, you know, few euros can drop you out of the program. To receive a few euros more takes you out of receiving the actual stipend. But for me, it's interesting because we should give a look into the whole pool of different socioeconomic backgrounds for a change, that it's not either not just poor or not just advantaged. It's everything. So I hope that's how it's going to work.
Thank you, Jasmina, for this helpful explanation. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I don't know whether anybody has got a question, otherwise I have got a question or two questions for Otto as well. I don't see anybody raising. I mean, my two questions, Otto, for you are, one, as I said, I learned a bit about ordoliberalism, but I would like to know, what does ordoliberalism say about the ecological and biodiversity crisis, and especially with aspect to the market? Because when I was teaching students, I was saying the market has no future, it has no animals, and it has no people without money. So how can the market solve all these issues? And I think for me, the ecological and biodiversity crisis are an extreme and good example of the failure of the market, in my assessment, being not an economist, being a public health person. And my second question for you is, what does ordoliberalism say about inheritance? Because, as I said, I come from a working class background, and I say always, it's to my students, it's good to have rich parents and to be born in rich countries. If you choose your parents and choose your country, right? So what does ordoliberalism say about inheritance? And also Foucault, that's why I'm very critical of Foucault, because I think he came from a very privileged, wealthy background, and I feel a lot of his is pretty detached, in my opinion, from everyday people's life. Over to you, Otto. Thank you.
Okay, good. Let me take the inheritance issue first. So I'm sort of coming also to ordoliberalism from the outside. I'm much more familiar with some of the other schools of liberalism, but so I don't know exactly what they say about inheritance tax, but I do know that James Buchanan, whom I mentioned, who is again not an ordoliberal, but is very similar in some ways, and comes from Virginia School of Economics in the United States. He very surprisingly perhaps supports 100% inheritance tax. So he thinks that basically he thinks that makes market society better, because that also makes it fairer. Everybody starts from the same level and so on. So that's how he saw that it should be. I mean, there's a lot of disagreement between, some support 0%, some support 100%. So there's a very big disagreement among some liberals on this issue. Now, yes, regarding the ecological issue, so I think the interesting thing about this is kind of a sad state of affairs, but I think it's commented on by many scholars, that ordoliberal scholarship has almost died out. And in fact, most of the best ordoliberal scholarship was really in the 20s, 30s, and maybe onto the 50s and 60s. But after that, there really isn't anything new. It just becomes kind of dogma or principles or some traces that live on in different ways. And some of those I think are good, some of those I think are bad. But the point is that it ceases to be this active research program. It becomes politics, it becomes rules, but it ceases to be engaged in pioneering scholarship. So since the ecological crisis really became into dominance, since the 70s, 80s, and so on, there really wasn't any really high-level order liberal scholarship to tackle it, especially in the German context. Some other liberal schools took it very seriously, but not the order liberals. So actually, I think you have to include those from the outside. You have to import those. You have to bring the best scholarship about this issue from the outside if you want to make order liberal ecologically conscious. And I think, I think market solutions to ecological crises, ecological questions, it really depends on the nature of the problem. So I think some problems you can find really good market-based solutions. So for example, in tackling climate change, I think you can find some pretty good market-based solutions based on taxing of externalities and based on carbon trading and so on, that have been shown to work quite well in the context where they've tried, because of the nature of the problem is such that you can put a price on pollution and so on. But when it comes to, for example, animal welfare and biodiversity, I don't think there are any good market-based solutions, at least not obvious ones, because of the nature of the problem that you cannot really put a price tag on animal welfare or biodiversity. At least we don't know how to do it. So I think, in some issues like pollution and climate change, you can have some more market-based solutions. In others, you really need some other mechanisms.
Thank you, Otto, for these very clear and helpful answers. Again, if nobody has got a question, I've got one now for Marek, but also for all of us, because when Marek spoke, I felt, oh, this is all saying what I'm saying all the time, why we should have a basic income. But my problem is that the people who understand it well are, in my opinion, the people who like what I call master-servant relationship in our societies, as the BN leader, President Zarat Davala said it. And the ones who would benefit most are not interested or not not sort of too how shall I say, involved in politics and to change the situation. So first for Marek, but also for everybody, what do we do to get your messages across to the people who really benefit and convince maybe some of the opponents who like the system as it is? I don't know whether I made myself clear, Marek.
Okay, thank you for your question and commentary. I agree with you. I think that there are several ways how we can promote basic income. Of course, all of us try to make some analysis and present them to the broader public in newspapers, in some seminars, etc., books, etc. I think that what is important is lobbying in political parties as well, and some of us do this kind of activity as well. I think it's important to contact few people who are interested in basic income or who could be possibly interested in basic income in various parties. Not only in one, of course, each of us has some political ideological preferences, but if we want to establish basic income, we have to be more open and give, let's say, lectures or webinars, consultations to various people. And that's what we try to do also in our circle on basic income in the Czech Republic, in Prague, that each of us has various preferences, political preferences. So therefore, each of us is closer to a different political party or movement. And then when we talk to the people in each party, we try to initiate discussions in a small circle of those party members. And then they can spread the knowledge in the party, they can deal with that, try to introduce it into political programs for elections or the basic program of the party or movement, etc., etc. So now I talk about political parties or movements because they are stronger concerning power. But in fact, of course, participatory democracy expects that we spread these ideas and we see how people like it in the broader public society and political public sphere with NGOs, etc., etc. So it's a whole spectrum of the people. But I think that the most powerful tool is trying to introduce it with journalists in the mass media and in political parties and movements, even if I prefer more participatory approach, doing that from below with citizens, but many times they are passive or they don't have much power to do that. And of course, we have to do it internationally. It's not enough to try to do it only in one country, but in the European movement or in continents and in cooperation with others globally.
Thank you, Marek. Anybody else who wants to say something on the question?
May I? May I?
Yes, please.
I'll try to be
Jasmina.
quick because I know we have to finish. First, I would like to say, because I also worked in politics, not just theoretical, but from practice as well. So absolutely, we need political will for this to happen. Of course, these groups which are not included usually don't go to politics. But however, I think sometimes, particularly in these days, the left or the social democratic voice maybe needs to use the tools of the right, and means talking more populistic than trying to always explain things in a very knowledgeable way if we want to reach everyone and not to just have the means for ourselves. So in the example of saying if we got from the slavery in Egypt, we need thousands and thousands of years to get to paid sick leave and paid vacation for the workers. So also basic income is not going to happen tomorrow, that's for sure. Maybe one of the things, what I noticed, people know, everyone talks about it, no matter their background, they know about the Finnish experiment in Slovenia. Experiments, I think, are quite quick and practical answer to this question. More and more experiments, because all of them show good results. The Finnish ones were a little bit lacking the results because of the conditions of the experiments changed in the meantime. So they really had an unfortunate situation, but the experiments are what people know. So no matter where from. So I think this might be one of the solutions. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Jasmina, Otto, you have something?
Yeah, in the interest of time, I will just say that we now experience kind of a moment of perhaps calm or perhaps even disappointment in some of the ways in which politics of basic income is going. So I think we need to really think about different strategies. So I have chosen to retreat into the academia for now, but I highly recommend using multiple strategies to do so. But thanks for the session.
May I ask?
Thank you.
Reinhard,
please,
just a short question. Do you have also your presentation in the Congress?
Have I got a presentation?
Yes.
Is it to me? Yes, I have. I did one yesterday about framing, financing, and strategizing of basic income. It was yesterday. If you search my name, it's exactly related around this topic. So I try to raise some of these issues. Like, I mean, one thing I think is very bad, in my opinion, is to use income tax, earned income tax, for financing basic income, because I think it meets a lot of resistance, because people say, why, I just earned my money and now it's taken away to give to other people. I think this is, for me, counterintuitive. So I think I don't know whether it exists, the term, I'm in favor of behavioral taxes. So if you like throwaway things, you should pay a high tax for throwaway things. If you like to produce throwaway things, you should pay a high tax on it. And I think it should be more ecological, the financing of basic income. But I mean, we can't discuss it here. We are at the end of our session, but you can, I invite you to look at it. So
thank you very
I would
much.
like to...
I'm sorry I missed your presentation, but I will try to look at the video. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks a
Thank
lot.
you.
And thanks, Jasmina. Thanks,
you.
Otto. Thanks, Marek, for your interesting
Bye.
presentations and our
Thank you.
discussion. I wish you all a good time at the conference and
Thank you.
all the best for your work. Thank you and have a good day. Bye-bye.
Take
you
care.
very
Bye
much.
bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.